Warning, incoming game over. Warning, incoming game over.
Hello everybody and welcome to Game Over Vancouver. Oh my god, what an ending. That was just incredible. Actually hard to believe how great that was. Lankinen stealing the game at the end there out of the hands of Tage Thompson, one of the best scorers on the Sabres. Then at the other end, Canucks get it done in overtime. Not a solo show today. I am joined by the one and only Joseph Augusti, writer for SFU Hockey, as well as color commentator in the PJHL. And Joseph, let's get right into it. What did you think of that game and that ending?
Wow, what an overtime. Kevin Lankin saving the Canucks skin multiple times. What an investment he's been. It's hard to believe he was available so late into August. Got to think that Colorado's really kicking themselves over not making him at least an offer that he couldn't refuse, considering their goaltending issues. But yeah, really bailed out the Canucks there. That game should have been over a few times in overtime in Buffalo's favor. But good for Vancouver. They showed a little bit of mettle. The offense showed up in a big way. Connor Garland, Jake DeBrusk, Pius Suter, continuing their strong seasons. And this is an important win considering how much they struggled against Pittsburgh the other day. Beat a team you should beat. Buffalo's nothing special. So good for Vancouver that they were able to weather the storm. If they lost this game, the narrative would have been, oh, you blew a 3-1 lead in the third period. But in the end, they were able to win in overtime, and it's a bit of a happier road to victory, we could say.
No, 100%. You're right that it's a very narrative shifting game. Coming away with that win, the win itself kind of releases a lot of the negativity around that game, but I don't think it's unfair to be negative about that game as a whole. I mean, this is a Buffalo Sabres team that has had major struggles this year, and Vancouver, I mean, as you said, very, very nearly blew a lead and honestly got bailed out by spectacular goaltending performances. I mean, not just in overtime, but in the third, well, the whole game, Kevin Lankin has just been absolutely incredible. I mean, as you mentioned, there's so many teams in this league that are regretting not going after Lankinen. I mean, Colorado, yeah, you wonder why that was not a priority in their offseason. But as David W. saying in the chat, a win's a win, but there's no doubt that game versus Sabres was very close. And I mean, you're entirely right. That was a super, super close game, and I think a very inconsistent performance up and down the lineup for Vancouver, because I was very, very happy with some performances. I mean, DeBrusk and Garland were just looked unbelievable. Obviously, Quinn Hughes. But there was a lot of other guys out there as well, primarily every defender not named Quinn Hughes, that I didn't think looked so good as well.
Yeah, exactly. Quinn Hughes, we all know how great he is. I know they mentioned on the broadcast he's now officially tied with Alex Edler for most assists by a defenseman in Canuck history. So congratulations to Quinn Hughes. But it really shows the lack of depth they have now without Hronik, not bringing back Zadorov, Derek Forbert's not playing very much. The fact of the matter is, if they want to be a Stanley Cup contender, which was their ambition heading into this season, they're going to have to make a move for somebody, especially on the right side. As much as we all like Tyler Myers and how he's rebounded a bit from a shaky first couple of years in Vancouver, he can't be your number one right shot defenseman if you're going to make a bit of a run here, considering we don't have a timeline on Filip Hronik.
No, absolutely, yeah. No release timeline yet for Filip Hronik. And it was already, even before the Hronik injury, people were saying that the Canucks wanted to add a defenseman to that mix anyways. And now with Hronik out, it becomes more of a necessity than an upgrade. And so it's tough, though, because if you look at the defensive market, I mean, they just played against one of the guys that's name has been in the rumor mill, Bowen Byram. There's also the likes of Marcus Pettersson. But, I mean, if you look at the names of defensemen who are on either expiring deals or just have 1 year left and have any realistic chance of getting moved, that list is very, very short. And because teams know Vancouver's plight right now, GMs aren't just going to help you out for free. Exactly the opposite. Teams are going to try and take advantage of Vancouver right now because they know how badly Vancouver needs a defenseman. So I almost think that it's kind of the exact wrong time to make a trade, even though it feels like you need to make a trade. If the Canucks are able to batten down the hatches and weather the storm until Hronik gets back, you're going to be in a much better position to make that trade. And you'll be closer to the trade deadline. That is assuming the best about Hronik, that he'll be back before the deadline. From what we heard from reporter Irfan Ghaffar, it does not sound like the injury will require surgery, at least. That's all the information we have on it. But Elliot Friedman saying that he did not think it was going to be an injury he came back from anytime soon. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle, not out a crazy long term with surgery, but it doesn't sound like we're getting Hronik back anytime soon.
No, exactly, and that's a problem because we all know how good the Hughes-Hronek pairing has been when paired together. One of, if not the best pairings in the whole National Hockey League. Because remember, after Chris Tanev left, Hughes cycled through a whole bunch of defensive partners and didn't find elite success until he was paired with Filip Hronek. And even like you were saying, Marcus Pettersson, Bowen Byram, those two are both left shot defensemen. And the Canucks have a good amount of left shot defensemen at the NHL level right now. Carson Soucy struggled a bit this year, but I believe he can be a decent second pair defenseman on a contending team. The question is, right-handed defensemen are at a premium in this league. There just aren't very many available for trade. And that's the Canucks' biggest weakness, I would say, right now, outside of maybe bottom six winger scoring. So, like, it's the old cliche. When you're struggling, GMs aren't going to throw you a lifeboat. They'll throw you an anchor. So it's all of a matter of who's willing to make a trade and who wants to make a trade. Because frankly, a lot of teams, even like Buffalo, for example, they're out of a playoff spot right now. There's lots of time for them to recover. Are they going to want to give up Owen Byram? He's young, he's talented. So really, it's anyone's game from here the rest of the season.
No, 100%, and it's interesting because we heard at the start of the year that Byram was being shopped by Buffalo, but the thing is with Buffalo is they have already said they don't care about prospects, they don't care about picks. They have enough young talent. What they want is legitimate roster players. And with someone of Bowen Byram's caliber, if you want him, you're having to give up a forward of a similar caliber. So, like, do you really think the Canucks can now trade a top six forward when their scoring has been so down to get an upgrade on defense? So it is just kind of tough for Vancouver in terms of knowing what to upgrade. I don't think there's any kind of easy options. But let's take a look back at the game tonight, or I guess tonight, this morning, this afternoon, whatever you want to call it. And let's start from the top up. Or start from the first period kind of thing. The Canucks had an okay start. Obviously, you know, the first goal going to hang on, sorry, I'm dropping my notes all over the place here. First goal going the other way, and then I also saw a couple nice plays from Benson. Of course, Benson getting that first goal to Byram. My first note immediately just Canucks could have had Zach Benson. I wish they would have taken him. Good BC kid, could be playing in our top six right now. Who knows? Maybe Tom Willander will pan out, but I would miss Benson. That was a little bit of a tough play where the defender on that play, who was Desharnais, lost his coverage, allowing Byram to get past him and tap home that goal. So, I mean, just not a great play by Desharnais on that goal. I mean, you lose your coverage one-on-one. You're facing the wrong way on that. He went for the guy outside the box as opposed to Byram on the back door. It's just not the right man. That's not who you're supposed to be covering. And I mean, yeah, Desharnais didn't look great the whole game, and we're kind of used to seeing that.
Yeah, he's probably been, in at least my opinion, the biggest disappointment thus far of all the free agents Vancouver brought in, because they brought in a fair amount. I mean, Danton Heinen hasn't produced probably as much as I would have liked, but Vincent Desharnais was brought in to give some right-hand shot defense, some physicality, some playoff experience. Of course, he was part of the Edmonton team that made the Stanley Cup final. Frankly, the concerns that I saw with him last year with Edmonton have translated to this year. Not a very strong skater, doesn't bring much, if anything, offensively, and the defensive mistakes are a lot. And we saw it on that first goal. Not great positioning. Of course, Jake DeBrusk falling in front of his own net didn't help, certainly. But in the end, no chance for Lankinen. Really nice tip by Byram off of a nice feed from Benson. Again, it's going to be an interesting conversation to have in a few years, depending on how Willander pans out at the NHL level, which of course we haven't seen him there yet. But yeah, Zach Benson, very talented. Bowen Byram, very talented. Two local kids teaming up on that first goal. But again, one that the Brandstrom Desharnais pairing will definitely want back.
No, absolutely. That pairing didn't look great tonight. I of course love the franchise. I've been a huge defender of him. I thought this was probably one of his worst games as a Canuck. Just defensively. The last few games, I thought we hadn't really seen too many bad things from him defensively. This game, there was several moments where he tried to get, where he just got blown by defensively. Either losing his coverage or the attacker would beat him one-on-one. Just not a great game. And then, of course, it was his turnover in overtime that ended up leading to the possession that got the Sabres an unreal chance. And I mean, one of the best saves I've seen from Lankinen, just period, end of sentence, in his career. And that save needed to be made because of an error from Erik Brandstrom. But looking at the second period, I mean, this was a really back and forth hockey game. It was a really great game to watch, if I'm honest. This is a super entertaining one for your money's value. Near the start of the second period, Sportsnet put up a really interesting statistic, which is that without JT Miller, since he has been gone, the Canucks face-offs as a team are at 35.8%, which is dead last in the league by a significant margin. With JT Miller in the lineup, they were 7th in the league till then. And I don't need to tell you, Joseph, how important faceoffs are in the sport of hockey, especially when it comes to special teams, but in general, they're incredibly crucial. 35.8% on the draw. I mean, like, that's going to lose you a lot of games just by lack of possession.
Yeah, exactly. And you think about it, looking at Vancouver's center depth right now, this game, you have Elias Pettersson as your first line center. He's played a lot of wing in his career. Faceoffs have never been his strong suit, and it probably never will be. And that's not what you're paying him for. You're not paying him the $11.6 million for his faceoffs. You paid for his offensive and defensive talent. So you can live with him hovering around the 44, 45% that he typically is. Now, without Miller, your second line center is Pius Suter, who for most of his career has played wing. Again, he's someone who, in an ideal scenario, is on the third line. And then third line center, Teddy Bluger. I think he's probably got our best face-off percentage of anyone this year, as I quickly look it up. But he's really, as much as I like Teddy Bluger, and I know how much Rick Tocchet loves him, he's really a defense-only guy at this point in his career. He's got 10 points in 21 games, which if you had told me that at the start of the year, I would have been very, very happy. But at the end of the day, defense mainly guy. And as I look at his faceoffs, he's an even 50%, which I'll take from Bluger. Maybe I'd like a little bit more. And then your fourth line center essentially thus far this year has been Atu Ratu, who's a rookie. And it's tough to expect rookies to have high-profile faceoff stats. So yeah, it's an issue, especially because even though the penalty kill was excellent today, going 5 for 5, they were able to get the puck quickly and efficiently out of the zone. So that's a plus. But it's hard to sustain. Like, I remember during the Bruce Boudreau year where the penalty kill was the worst in the league by far. I just remember Bo Horvat struggling so much on the faceoffs in his defensive zone. And that was a big reason why the penalty kill was so bad, was because of faceoffs. So it's something to monitor while Miller's out. I'm not sure exactly when he's coming back, but we know how strong he is in the faceoff dot. So they need him. They need JT Miller to be at full strength, to playing the hockey we all know he can play, because he's a very, very important member of this team. I'd argue the second most important on the entire team.
I'd agree with you. I think behind Quinn Hughes, he is the most important player on the team. And let's get to who should be the third most important player on this team, because I said this last show, every time I tune into Canucks hockey, I'm so unimpressed with Elias Pettersson. Now, I missed several games down the last kind of stretch of games, and I know for a fact that I looked at the sheet, and he did well. So I'm not trying to rag on him too much. But tonight, another really disappointing performance from Pettersson. I don't know about you. I didn't really see anything from him. The main thing that I noticed from Pettersson in that game, the one play that comes to mind, was when he had a grade A opportunity to shoot, chose not to shoot, fanned on his pass back to the defense, caused a great opportunity for Buffalo back the other way. That was my image of Pettersson in this game, and quite frankly, just another performance that isn't good enough for $11.6 million.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Zach. He's been disappointing this year. You look at the counting stats now: 22 games, 7 goals, 10 assists, 17 points. That's not bad. On his old contract of $7.35 million, you take that. But they paid him a lot of money. He makes more than a lot of players in this league. He makes more than Draisaitl, makes more than Nylander, makes more than Crosby, makes more than Rantanen. You expect more. And you look at that power play instance where he didn't shoot. I've seen that a lot the past few years. Because if you remember, you look back to Pettersson's first couple years in the NHL. What was his signature? The one-timer on the power play and his wicked wrist shot. I feel like that's faded a bit the past couple of years. I don't know if it's a confidence thing or if his wrist is still bugging him because he's had recurring injuries with his wrist over the past few years. I don't know. But today, like, I'm just looking at his stats here. He was a -1 in 22 minutes of action. No points, not great. One good play I remember him having in this game was on that power play goal by Connor Garland, where he kind of lost the puck in his skates, but was able to recover and get it to Besser, who sent it to Hughes, who had a tap in for Garland at the side of the net. So that's the only positive play that stuck out to me. He needs to pick it up because they don't have Miller to insulate him a little bit. Without Miller, center depth is weak. So I need more from Elias Pettersson. You have the contract. You don't have that distraction anymore because we all know it affected him last year. I just need more because there's no excuses at this point. It's interesting to look at. Like I was thinking as a thought experiment, was there any scenario where he would be left off Sweden's Four Nations team? And no, he isn't going to be. He'll be on the team. But it'll be interesting what kind of role he'll play because going into this year, I thought he'd be on the top two lines. Now I'm wondering if he's going to be a third line left wing or if he's even going to be part of the third line at all. Maybe he'll be on the fourth line because Sweden's got a lot of good talent.
No, you make a great point about that, and I mean, yeah, I don't think there's any chance that he'll be left off of the team. But no, it's a great point that there's a good chance that his line mates will be lower quality, that he'll get less time. Because I think last year you'd have said he was a lock for at the very least the top six. Whether or not you have him as that first center or whether or not you have him as the second center, those were kind of the two options. Whether now, yeah, I mean, he's not the only Swede that's falling. Erik Karlsson, of course, he was already listed to the team, which is probably the only reason that he's on it, because he wasn't an advanced pick. Probably wouldn't be making it right now with how awful he's played. But yeah, Pettersson has not been great. And I mean, I don't know. Yeah, just another performance tonight where you're really waiting to see where that superstar Elias Pettersson that takes over games is. I mean, there were so many games last year, and even more the year before, where he would just run the game. He would set up amazing passes, highlights, 3-4 point nights. Just feel like I haven't seen that this year even once, and that's what's been kind of worrying. And I love your point about the recurring wrist injuries, because I do feel like that is a huge part of it. I feel like that alone would attribute to the confidence issues that I think we can all agree he is experiencing. But I also think it's a big reason why we haven't seen that one-time power play slap shot, because seriously, I think we've seen it, once this year? I think it was once against Nashville, where he had that in the loss, where he hammered it home, and everyone was like, oh, he's back! Good old one-timing Pettersson is back for the Canucks! And that was it. That was the last we saw. That was the first and last we've seen of it this season. So whether it's solely confidence, whether it's wrist, I mean, you gotta try and shoot more. I mean, I know that he isn't, just a goal scorer. Obviously, he's a huge playmaker as well. But when you're not really doing either, you've got to find ways to contribute offensively, because that is what the team needs you to be doing most. Defensive contributions are nice, and they are expected of a talented center who has previously received Selke votes. But offensively is what this team primarily needs him to do.
Yeah, exactly. And even thinking of that Nashville goal, I remember in the seconds before that one-timer goal, he pump faked a one-timer, sent it back, got the puck back, and then one-timed it home. It was kind of you got the full Pettersson experience there a little bit. But yeah, just thinking back in the playoffs, yes, he was probably banged up, as a lot of players are at that time. He underperformed. This season's been an underperformance. Lots of runway to go in the season, still, but it's something to keep an eye on, especially considering Niels Hoglander's fall from grace, both on the ice and now that he's found himself in Rick Tocchet's doghouse. Because again, today, 6:28 in ice time. I don't know if he was hurt. I don't think he was. At 6:28, he scored 24 goals last year, all at even strength. It befuddles me how quickly he's lost Rick Tocchet's trust.
No, 100%, because he very much does seem like the archetype of player that Rick Tocchet would like, which does kind of make you think where the loss of trust comes from. And I think it's because he overall plays a pretty good game. But the reason I say overall is because he'll make just critical, huge mistakes. And the thing is, with mistakes of that caliber, in a league like the NHL, they go punished most of the time. And even if they don't, then you're relying on your teammates to bail you out. And so even if you play great for 59 seconds of a shift, if on that 60th second, it's a really bad turnover that, loses in possession, why do they want to have you out there? Unless you are heads and tails creating more chances than other guys. And right now he's not. And so I think that Niels Hoglander is going to be a big trade chip for Vancouver. I do not foresee him sticking around in the team. He's getting the Kuzmenko treatment. And what happened to Kuzmenko? He got shipped off at the deadline for Lindholm. I think that's what's going to happen to Hoglander. We already know there have actually been teams inquiring about Niels Hoglander. The Columbus Blue Jackets and the Pittsburgh Penguins amongst those teams, both of whom have defenders that the Canucks have kicked tires on in the past in David Jiricek in Columbus and Marcus Pettersson in Pittsburgh. So I'm not saying for sure anything will happen, and I'm definitely not saying anything will happen soon, but I do think that we are more likely to see Höglander get traded before that contract kicks in than we are likely to see him being around as a Canuck next year.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned that contract, Zach, because they just signed him to a 3-year deal, with a $3 million cap hit. And yes, the salary cap is moving up in the NHL after it being flat for a while. But I'm just wondering, like with Kuzmenko, he had one more year left at 5.5. And you knew in the right situation, Calgary, a bit of a lower pressure environment, not going to make the playoffs. He could just do his thing, which is all offense, no defense, which the second Rick Tocchet took over for Bruce Boudreau, he didn't like Kuzmenko. He was in his doghouse. He didn't back check. He didn't forecheck. He didn't do his wall work, which is huge for Rick Tocchet. The thing is with Höglander, he does all that stuff. So it kind of befuddles me a little bit to how much Rick Tocchet doesn't like him because he doesn't play on the power play. He's not in the top 6 anymore. It's just very odd, and I think it would be frankly a waste if they were to ship him out here. The contract hasn't even kicked in yet. He's very young. In terms of winger prospects, outside of Lekkerimaki, there isn't much coming in terms of winger depth from the AHL. So I'm very interested to see how this goes along here because this situation's getting untenable rather quickly.
No, absolutely. And I think one thing that other teams like about the fact that Höglander just signed a contract is he's now cost controlled. You're looking at a guy who you know he can be a 20-goal scorer, and you know he can be a 20-goal scorer, as you rightfully pointed out, at even strength. Not only that, he's now signed at only $3 million. So if another team wants him, that's a great contract for someone. If they think that Höglander could be a fit in their top 6, having a winger in your top 6 for $3 million is just fantastic. So I do think he is a very attractive trade chip for other teams. But it begs the question of whether or not the Canucks feel they are in a good space to make a big trade. I mean, what has this team done to earn a big trade? Frankly, you're barely beating the likes of the Buffalo Sabres, thanks to your netminder making stupendous saves, not just in overtime, but in the third period as well. You lost to the dead last Pittsburgh Penguins, or the nearly dead last Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, I don't know if this team kind of is close enough to being a contender. You can rightfully say, okay, we are one big trade away. Now, I'm not saying this team can't turn it around. You're down Demko and Miller. Of course this team can turn it around. But how much of an upgrade can Demko possibly be on Lankinen when he's playing this well? I mean, what do you expect Demko to come in and do that Lankinen hasn't done? So really, you're looking at just JT Miller. And I mean, even when Miller was here, the team wasn't looking that great anyway. So I am interested to see kind of what this management group, what their style of approach is to this trade deadline. Because as much as I really felt like this year could be a seriously contending year for the Canucks, they just have not done anything to make me reinforce that belief.
No, I totally agree with you. The thing is with the Demko question is, how good can we expect him to be? Because now we're approaching a 6-7 month layoff. Hasn't played since game 1 versus Nashville, the first round. And Lankinen's been great. The thing is with Lankinen is, if Demko comes back, let's say he's his old self, he 9-10, 9-15 save percentage, which is great. I think that's a big plus for Vancouver because Lankinen will take over Shilov's minutes. And Shilov's has just been awful this season. He's got like an 847 save percentage, which is ghastly. He can go down to Abbotsford and develop, which is where he belongs at this point in his career. So you wonder about that. And it is an important question to wonder. Does this group deserve it? They're above 500, but only just. They barely beat Buffalo, a team with a losing culture that dates back almost 15 years. It's just, what more can you add? And what can you send away? Because in terms of first round picks, yes, but those only go so far. Like, unless you're giving up Lekkerimaki or Willander, there's not a lot of prospect depth behind them. I like how Max Sasson has looked, but in terms of other players at Abbotsford, Cole McWard, B-list prospect, Danila Klimovich trending towards being a C-list prospect, isn't a lot waiting in the wings for Vancouver. And I do wonder if this might just be a year where if they continue to hover around 500, even with Demko, Alvin and Rutherford just say, you know what, it might just be worth it reloading for next season.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely see. I mean, we're at the point this season where it could go either way. There's definitely a chance the Canucks could rebound and be just as good as we expected them to be. And I still have high hopes for that outcome. All it takes, we've seen this team clicking at full strength before, and I believe this team can click at full strength again. For me, I'm a lot more worried about the offense than I am the defense, because the thing is with the defense is a lot of roster turnover, and I think that there's just kind of a limit on what some of those players can actually deliver you. But the offense should have only been upgraded from what we saw last year. I mean, you can't make the argument that on paper it's worse. You just can't. You look like a fool. Like Lindholm delivered a lot in the playoffs, and I mean a lot. He was our second or third highest scorer. But in the regular season, there was very little from Lindholm. So other than that, the offense has been way, way upgraded on paper. And yet, this team is struggling to score goals so badly. I mean, they're barely getting any line driving offense from anyone that's not named Connor Garland. I mean, seriously, he has been their best forward night in, night out, without question. I mean, if you're going to ask me who should be making 11.6, I mean, right now it looks like Garland, which is awesome because the first several years of his contract, everyone was saying, well, he's pretty good. He's definitely an NHLer, but he's way overpaid. Now, finally comes the time for him to be underpaid, which I'll be honest, when he was first brought here, I never really thought would be attainable, but man, that is a Tocchet guy to a T. Before we move to the second period here of Game Over Vancouver and continue our chat, I did forget to read our sponsor off the top. Shows what a pro I am. Hyperdrive Hockey is, of course, the sponsor of Game Over Vancouver. If you've watched for any length of time, you have heard me talk about Hyperdrive Hockey, and actually just put out a bunch of new episodes regarding the PWHL. So if you're a PWHL fan, definitely check out the newest episodes of Hyperdrive Hockey, the flagship show of Game Over Network. All things hockey across various leagues in multiple countries, whatever it is and wherever it is. Max, Daphne, and Kev have you covered for all your hockey news with a steady dose of fan engagement. You can find Hyperdrive Hockey on the Game Over Network YouTube channel or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts on the Hyperdrive Hockey page at thegameovernetwork.com. And yeah, latest episode about the PWHL should be fun. I'm excited to say I'll be going to a PWHL games. They've got a showcase coming up here in Vancouver in January. That ought to be fun. But let's move on to the second period now. And I mean, we kind of did it during the first, but this is where we usually start to talk about more individuals and what we saw from them. And the one that I wanted to read off the top, Max Sasson. I thought he has actually been one of the best. I think of the players we've seen called up from the AHL this year, he has looked the best in terms of consistency and NHL readiness. Now, I don't think his offensive upside is anywhere close to the likes of Jonathan Lekkerimäki, but you do have his board work, which, as you rightfully pointed out earlier, is one of the biggest things that will get you into Rick Tocchet's good graces, has been amazing. His forechecking is there. He is everything that I want to see from a fourth liner. And he actually looks ready for some more NHL minutes, so I'd be fine if he stayed on the main roster for a few more games here.
Yeah, I thought he looked really good in the bottom six. Of course, he he assisted in his very first game against Ottawa. And he was scratched for a game by Rick Tocchet, which I found rather surprising. But today, he's back in the lineup, 9:32 time on ice, so right about the average for a fourth liner. He's a +1, had two hits. We know Rick Tocchet likes his bottom six guys to be physical and on the forecheck. So yeah, I'm excited to see what he can bring here. I'd like to see him get a good stretch of games around the 12 to 13 minute mark, provide solid defense, get a couple points every now and again, because Dakota Joshua hasn't quite gotten back to where he was last year, another -2 today in 11 minutes. So there's a spot for him if he can continue to play Rick Tocchet hockey, carry over some offense from the AHL. I've been happy with his play, especially since Lekkerimäki left the lineup, because they need some youth and speed in that bottom six for sure.
No, absolutely. And you know what? You mentioned his name, so I'm going to move right on to Dakota Joshua, who I did think he looked decent offensively. There was definitely some chances generated between him and Garland that I thought looked pretty good. But yeah, you're right. Defensively, I mean, not just a -2, of course. Plus minus can be a skewed stat, but it was on the Cousins goal, the second Buffalo goal, where Joshua just got completely beaten at the blue line in a one-on-one show of skill between two forwards, Dylan Cousins, Dakota Joshua. Cousins absolutely outskills him at the blue line, blows right by him, and immediately scores a goal. And it was one of those things where, okay, that play does happen sometimes. You do get beaten, okay. But you've got to just play a little bit safer there if you're Dakota Joshua. Stay on the inside of the man. Don't try to play too aggressive, especially at your own line, because when you do play that far up on your own blue line, if you get beat, well, it's all the space in the world for the forward. I mean, the rest of his team's covering their man, and so he was just all alone and had all the space in the world. And so I would have liked to see Joshua with a little bit more of a defense-first mentality. I still think he's maybe getting his feet under him. He has not played as many games as the rest of the lineup has. I'm still willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but you're right. I didn't think it was a great game for Dakota Joshua.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, when you're coming off what he had, a long recovery, tough personal hardship. It's a tough situation to go through. Absolutely. But yeah, it's going to take him some time to get his feet back under him. I'm not expecting him to shoot 20% like he did last year. The whole Canuck team has seen a regression in their shooting percentage and their PDO, which is something a lot of experts expect to happen thus far in this season. So let's give it some time. He's looked good with Connor Garland, who I'd say has been probably the best Canuck outside of Quinn Hughes this entire season. So I'm hoping for them to continue to refine their chemistry as the season goes along. But it is something to watch how long it takes him to get back up to his level last season.
No, absolutely. And speaking of players getting back up to level, the first game that Brock Besser was back, you could tell he was looking slow. Tonight, great game for Brock Besser. I believe he had a pair of assists. He definitely had one. Yeah, a pair of assists. And I mean, he was great. I really liked him in the offensive zone. Still a little slow, but to be fair, Brock Besser has always been a very slow skater. So I won't put too much stock into that. But his offensive capabilities kind of looked like they were right back where they belonged. I believe it was him who helped set up that was it the first or the second one? Oh god, I've got way too many notes.
It was
This really
the
was an
Garland.
exciting game. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it was
The
Garland. Then,
power play.
yeah. Then the shot comes through, and yeah, Garland tips one home from Brock Besser. And yeah, no, Besser looked great. I was really happy to see him back. Looks like he's had not really any major troubles getting back up to the pace that we expect Brock Besser to be playing at. And hopefully if Miller can do the same when he comes back, that line can get right back to clicking quickly. But I was quite happy with what I saw from Besser.
Yeah, so was I. And to your point about his speed, Brock Besser's never going to be a burner. He's never been a burner with his feet. He makes his money with his shot and his passing abilities. And I was really happy to see him get 2 assists today. The first, a secondary on the DeBrusque goal, and then he set up that Garland power play tap-in, which is really nice to see. And he had a breakaway in this game, which usually you don't see out of Brock Besser, given his aforementioned speed issues. He was stopped by Luukkonen, but it's always good to see him get himself into those positions. He's an important player. You look at the Canucks turnaround the past couple of years, one of the major catalysts is Brock Besser refinding his goal scoring acumen. He kind of lost it for a few years at the end of the Green era and through the Bruce Boudreau era. It was something that he kind of lost. His goal scoring went down. He didn't score 30 goals for a while. And then last year, he just found it. Because remember, he had one foot out the door. His agent, Ben Hackinson, was given permission to talk to other teams about a potential trade because he was a pending UFA at the time, or a couple years away from UFA. So I am happy he's been able to find his groove again in Vancouver over the last season, and the fans love him. So it'll be interesting to see what his next contract looks like, if the Canucks are going to be able to afford it, how his play continues. But a nice start in his first or second game back in the lineup for Brock Besser.
No, 100%. And I actually thought I was most impressed on that secondary assist because it was Besser that went into the far boards on that corner and dug out a loose puck in between two Buffalo defenders. Dug it loose back to Suter, I believe it was, who shot, and then Jake DeBrusk is sitting right there to get the rebound. But it was all started off a really great physical play by Brock Besser in the corners, which is when he's coming back from injury, that can be what players shy away from the most, is really getting in the nitty-gritty physical areas. You don't want to get hurt again. Maybe you're still fighting through things. It's understandable, but that was not something we saw from Brock Besser. He was willing to get right in there, willing to get it done, and he did, setting up a great chance. And you know what? Let's get to the man that buried that chance, Jake DeBrusk. You know, he had a bad October. No getting around that. But since then, he has been amazing for Vancouver, and he's been exactly what they've needed him to be. And honestly, people were saying that there's a chance that contract could end up looking like a steal. Yeah, I think there's a really good chance it will end up looking like a steal. If he can continue to play at the rate that he's been playing, he's not making a whole lot of money, especially for a top six winger. And so I've been very happy with Jake DeBrusk ever since the start of November, and we're almost in December now.
Yeah, he's really turned it around. Because I remember watching that first month of the year and thinking, do we sign another Louis Eriksson? But of course, the comparison ends there, considering he's just much younger than Eriksson was at the time. He's only 28, Jake DeBrusk, so he's a young-ish UFA. But yeah, he's been really solid lately. He scored a couple of goals against Ottawa, one against his old team in Boston. Didn't score against Pittsburgh, but scored again today. When his feet are moving, he can be a really good player. He's someone that just has to keep the motor going, the energy going, and he'll find himself in good positions. And really, what he needs to do is find some chemistry with people in the Canucks top six, because that's been a problem the Canucks have had, not being able to find proper wingers for their good centers. How many times back in the Bo Horvat era did we muse about how his a revolving cycle of wingers that he had to deal with? And Jake DeBruski was brought in to fill a need, and in the first month of the season, he didn't fill it. But sometimes it takes a bit of time for new players, new city, new management, new coaching, a totally new system than from what he had in Boston, because that was the only organization he ever knew, right? So sometimes it takes a little bit of time, and I'm happy he's been able to figure it out here this month because he's a big part of their future.
No, absolutely. And I was even happier that Boston had to let him go for free, because it officially means they have gotten nothing from having 3 consecutive picks in the first round. That is they're nothing now. 3 consecutive first round picks turned into nothing.
Yep, that's Don Sweeney, GM of the Canada Four Nations Hockey Club.
Haha. Yeah, well, actually, honestly, why don't we talk about that? Because this is my last show before the rosters are released. Because as I'm sure you know, the rosters are released Monday. They have to be finalized Monday, and I'm sure one of the insiders will leak it the moment it's finalized. So we'll hear about it Monday. Now, looking on paper, pretty much the rosters are relatively set in stone. Like, you know who most of the players are going to be. The biggest question mark, I think, and I'll pose this question to you. Who the heck is starting for us in net?
Oh, there's no real good options, is there, Zach,
No.
for Canada? I did a little with one of our friends from school. I did a little prediction of this the other day, and I was just looking at the goaltending. Me and the friend were going through Olympics of past, looking at 2014. There was Price, there was Crawford, there was Luongo, and then looking at the World Cup, you had Holtby and Price again at the absolute height of his powers. And you look at all those great goaltenders Canada has, and the 3 that I have projected on my team, they would not even come close to sniffing those prime rosters. I personally think it's going to be Jordan Binnington starting game 1 in net, barring something really surprising like he completely loses his form or he gets injured. I think in a short tournament, you need players with a competitive edge to kind of get the guys going a little bit. And if it's one thing Jordan Binnington has, it's a competitive edge, because we know when he's on his game, he's unflappable. It's just when things go bad for him, that's when he loses his focus. I think Binnington will start. I have Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson as the other 2 goalies on the roster. But I think, without question, the worst group of goaltenders in this Four Nations tournament. It's really gone poorly for Canada the past few years in terms of developing goaltenders.
It has. It's just been terrible, and there have been some really interesting pieces put out about the development of Canadian goaltenders. I do think that a lot of it just has to do with like somewhat differing styles between Canadian goaltending coaches. But looking at the roster itself, I mean, yeah, I wanted to disagree with you, but the second you said Jordan Binnington, that's who I had as well. I think that he's undoubtedly been inconsistent. In 2018, 2019, he was probably the best goalie in the world for that one playoff run. I mean, he was incredible. Huge reason why the Blues won. Won the cup in that year. And then he actually had a huge year last year as well. I believe he was in the top 5 for Vezina voting. He had a 918 save percentage, which is very good. Or 913, still very good. You don't need to justify those numbers.
In the context of today's numbers, that's even better with the
Yeah.
goal scoring that's happened. And his goals saved above expectations were excellent last year as well. This year, different story.
Yeah, this year he's not been great. I mean, an 898 save percentage, but I still think you have to go with him because he has it all on paper. He has the championship pedigree. He's won a cup. He won't crack under high pressure because, again, there's nothing higher pressure than the Stanley Cup, and he's been there, done that. So I think you do have to go with him. There are some potentially higher upside. I mean, Aiden Hill also is a cup winner. Not also someone you feel great about, but it's just, that's the thing. You don't feel great about whoever you put in that. You could go with like a really young guy. There's a couple, young guys for Canada. Hofer maybe, another Blues goalie. But just overall, yeah, it's not looking great for Canada. And you just need him to be good enough. The rest of the roster will be incredible. Sammy Baines in the chat saying, does Zach Hyman make Team Canada? I'm going to say no, just because of his injury. I think the fact that he's been injured for a significant portion of this season and that right now he's only just coming back, they're probably not going to want to take a chance. And Canada's biggest strength is its forward core, so they don't really need to take a chance on someone who's coming off of an injury. And honestly, where would Zach Hyman play in the lineup? He has that great chemistry with McDavid, but do you want him on the first line with Connor McDavid? And if you don't, then I feel like there's better individual players than Zach Hyman. So I'd be surprised to see Hyman make Team Canada. Honestly, I'd rather, if we're talking about fringe players that might or might not make it, I'd rather have someone like Tom Wilson, someone who's going to be a little bit better in your bottom six than Hyman.
I can't justify putting Tom Wilson on this team. I know he's riding a shooting percentage bender right now, and I know the physicality he brings. But I just think back at the World Cup in 2016, the Americans had John Tortorella as their coach, and they're like, oh, we're building a team that's going to beat Team Canada. And they brought Justin Abdelkader, who was well past his prime. That's what I worry about with Canada if they do something like that. And I don't think Zach Hyman has a place on this team. Like in the little roster I did, looking at left wing, I didn't really pay much attention to handedness when I did my wings. I had Point, Reinhart, Marchand, and Lafreniere. This season, Hyman hasn't been better than any of those players because even with his injury, before he got hurt, he wasn't playing well. He wasn't finishing any of his usual tap-ins that he had last year. So that's something I don't think you can justify bringing him. He hasn't been good enough.
And also on top of that, no disrespect to Zach Hyman, but if you think about the kinds of goals he's scoring, you're tapping home amazing setups from Connor McDavid. And yes, okay, he will be on Team Canada. There is the chance to do that again. But do you really think someone like Braden Point can't do the exact same thing while also being able to generate plays himself? I agree with you. I just don't think there's a place for Hyman on this lineup. But honestly, I'm going to try to pull up your rosters here because I know that I saw them on Twitter. I'm down to do a little bit of Four Nations talk here because I do think it's going to be a really interesting tournament. This is the first time in years we are getting to see best on best hockey. Although I will say, someone pointed out that this should be, or it could be 6 nations or 8 nations, and I'd love to see that. I mean, I know why Russia's not in it, the sanctions, stuff like that. I'd love to see a way for them to get the Russians through, because I'm sorry, you're not playing best on best hockey without Russia. You're just not. They have one of the best rosters. I don't think Russia's better than the USA. I don't know that they're better than Canada, but I think they're probably right around Sweden, if not better than Sweden. They've certainly got the best set of goaltenders in this tournament. So I would have liked to see Russia, but yeah, okay. So I have found your rosters. So why don't we take a quick look at these? And yeah, I agree with you that Hyman doesn't have a place. I don't see your Canada one. I see your US and your Sweden one.
I'm just about to post it. I'm one behind.
There we go. We did the show too early.
I have the first 3. I'll post it right now. Just give me 2 seconds.
And you know what I'll do if we're gonna talk about this? I'm actually gonna we'll start with the States, and I'm gonna bring it up onto the stream. So just give me a moment here. And I will bring this up on the stream so that you guys, the viewers, can check out what Joseph has concocted for these rosters, and I will brutally rip apart any errors I see. Even though actually from the brief scan I just did, it's mostly what I would have as well. So we'll make this, we'll put it up in the, where can I put it that's not just going to block both of us? We'll make it kind of small, and we'll put it right here. And we'll do that. Okay, so now up in the middle of our face cams here, you guys should be able to see, hopefully you guys can read that just fine, the rosters that Joseph has for the United States. And I mean, this is why I think the United States have the best chance of winning this tournament, is just look at that defensive core. By God, I am horrified. Quinn Hughes and Charlie McAvoy, and then Slavin and Fox. I mean, that is the best top 4 I've ever heard of. Definitely better than anything Canada can put up. Bottom pairing of Werenski and Faber doesn't fall off. But then the goaltending as well. Hellebuck, he's the epitome of consistency in the regular season. So hopefully he'll treat this as the regular season and not the playoffs, and he'll be just fine. And then the forward core as well. I mean, you've got nice youth. One notable omission that I see is you have not selected either of JT Miller or Brock Besser to make this team. Now, Brock Besser I can understand, but leaving off JT Miller, let's hear your justification for that.
So when I did this, because me and my friend Nathan Maley recorded our podcast and we spoke about this team, It was, I think, the day of or the day after Miller announced his hiatus. So I didn't know how long he would be out for at that point. And frankly, he wasn't fantastic in his minutes. Now, I think I said it on the show I did with Nathan. If he's healthy, he probably replaces Clayton Keller, is who I think I said.
Wow.
Because, yeah, because I really like Matthew Boldy. I'm really high on him.
That's exactly why I
And
would
I
say
didn't
him.
do Yeah, and I didn't do extras in this little list, but
That's fair.
probably Boldy or Keller would be the 13th forward. But yeah, and in terms of Besser, injury, and he hasn't been fantastic thus far this year. And that you have a lot of kind of offense first snipers on this team. I thought Keller's a little more well rounded in his game, and I think Clayton Keller's one of the most underrated players in the game of hockey. So yeah, forward core. Honestly, I think it might be better than Canada. I think their depth is a little bit better,
Wow.
and they're also younger. If you look at it, Marchand, Crosby. I just posted my Canada roster. Stamkos is on my team. He's rather old. I think the USA is the favorites in this tournament.
I completely agree about the U.S. being favorites. I won't push back on that. I do think the Canadians have the better forward core. I think where the States have the advantage is both defense and goaltending. And you know what they say, defense wins championships. Looking at this, I mean, I think JT Miller is better than a number of guys you have here. I would take JT Miller over three of the guys on this list. You know what? I also really like Clayton Keller, but I would take Miller over
Wow,
Tage
calling
Thompson,
me out.
Dylan Larkin, and Matt Boldy. When JT Miller is at the height of his prime, he is one of the best forwards in this league. I mean, since he's joined Vancouver, he has scored the 11th most points in the league. If you measure points in the league from when JT Miller joined Vancouver to now, 11th most out of everyone. And I just don't think you can take that away from him. On top of that, yes, he's not had a great start of the season this year, but you saw him in the playoffs last year. He was the second best shutdown center behind Barkov. When it came to shutting down McDavid, which isn't really something you can do unless you're Barkov, JT Miller did a very fine job of it. And on top of that, he's incredibly good, gifted offensively. So I am shocked you left him off. I would take him over either of those bottom two centers and Matt Boldy. But I agree that Clayton Keller, he does not get enough love. He is an incredible hockey player. I wouldn't be taking him off either. So yeah, no, overall, I mean, the United States, they are going to just be a terror to work with kind of thing. And then goaltending, I mean, Hellebuck, Ottinger, and Stolarz. I do find it interesting that you put Stolarz over either Demko or, who's the other one they have? There's another big name they have.
Yeah, it's escaping me right now, but
It's
we
someone
haven't
big
seen
that we're
Demko.
both just forgetting.
Yeah, I know it's kind of funny, but we haven't seen Demko. We haven't seen him play. He could come back and be terrible.
Oh, Swayman.
Stolarz, I think, has a 9. Swayman. Well, Swayman has been terrible, so
Swayman has been terrible.
so
That's
we
fair.
do have some tangible evidence there. Stolarz has like a 930 save percentage, and Toronto was not a defensive juggernaut. I think Stolarz would be Canada's starter personally, but
He would be.
but
He would be,
alas,
but let's be real. How much is that actually saying right now?
I know. But so I went with the numbers. I went with the hot hand. So that's why I went with Stolarz there. Here's Sweden.
Yeah, I am gonna bring up Sweden here, because there we go. Just posted Canada, so I'll get that up next. But let's do Sweden now. So Sweden, it's tough. Like they're good. I just don't necessarily see them being as good as Canada or the States. Now, one thing that I will say about anyone who is watching that doesn't necessarily know how this tournament works, it's a round robin and then a final. It is a 4-game tournament. So any team can win this. Any team has a realistic chance because it's just about who gets hot. But I do think on paper, Sweden's just a little weaker. Although honestly, pretty good lineups up and down. I'm not really seeing any notable omissions. One thing that I will say is I completely agree with you demoting Mika Zibanejad all the way down to the fourth line. He has been what has happened to Zibanejad this year? He has been terrible for the Rangers. I mean, his lack of finishing is comedic. He had that chance earlier today. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that where he hits the side of the net on an borderline unmissable chance. But I think for me, where I have some major questions for Team Sweden is you want to talk about old. Well, look at their defense. I mean, you've got Carlson, who's just been atrocious. I mean, I don't even think Carlson would make this team if he was not part of the 6 that were already confirmed back in the summer. Hedman also very old now. I mean, still pretty solid, but I have my questions about him. The left side looks pretty good. I mean, it's hard to argue with Ekholm, Dahlin, or Lindholm, and then Gustav Forsling as well. If you can get playoff Forsling, he's incredible. And then some very inconsistent goaltending. I mean, undoubtedly, Markstrom, Allmark, and Gustafsson, if they're playing well, would all crack Team Canada's #1 spot. But that's an inconsistent set of goaltenders. What I see here with Sweden is they've got a team that could compete with Canada or the US, but I just don't see it. I mean, I think they have some weaknesses. Like, if you look at that left wing depth, I'm not a huge fan of that left wing. I mean, like, Bratt, Kempe, and Raymond are all legitimate top-line left wingers, but they're not superstars that you see on either the States or Canada.
No, and if you think of Sweden, they haven't won anything at a high level in a long time. I think the last time they won World Juniors was 2012, which was a long time ago. We probably have viewers who weren't even born in 2012, as much as that pains me to admit. But yeah, I think the only way Sweden can win here is they just outspeed everybody. I think they're the fastest team in this tournament. Brat's really fast. Lucas Raymond, Leo Carlson, Nyquist, even though he's older, is really fast.
Nylander's
William
slash.
Carlson. Absolutely. And Philip Forsberg's one of my favorite players in the league. I love watching him play. It's a real shame that he's not talked about more. But yeah, the defense, I really like Matthias Ekholm. He's old. Erik Karlsson's looked like a shell of his former self. Even Victor Hedman, I think, is overrated at this day and age. He's more of a name brand than
Yeah.
elite player at this time. And Hampus Lindholm, when I made this list, he wasn't hurt yet. He's been out for the past couple of weeks. So we'll see if he's even ready in time for the Four Nations. He might not even make the team. So Sweden, I think Sweden is kind of the de facto third place team in this tournament.
Yeah, I don't actually. Have you made one for Finland, or did you just not even?
I have.
You
yes.
have? Okay,
I have.
sounds good.
You just got to scroll a little bit.
I gotta scroll a little bit. Okay, well, why don't we do Canada next?
Yeah.
We'll go to Canada here because I do think that Canada has a really interesting roster, and let's take a look at. I'm sure you'll have some notable omissions on this team. I already see that you don't have Bedard in there. I think that's fair enough.
I do.
Well, I see that you have as an extra.
Forward, yeah.
You have as an extra, and if
Yeah.
he's an extra, realistically, you're not playing in a 4-game tournament unless someone plays their way off the list. Now, for me,
So just to that point, really quickly, Zach, just to that point, I do wonder if it's like the World Juniors where they dress 13 forwards and then one kind of cycles through the lines. That was kind of my thinking here.
yeah, you could see that. Now, I have some direct comps to make. You know who I think Doughty is like Hedman. I think at this point, he's past his prime. He's old. He is a name brand. I still really like Drew Doughty. I'm not trying to crap on him, but of course, he's coming off a really big injury at the start of the year. Unfortunate for him. And he's like, 35 now? You know, he is old by NHL standards. So I like your idea of having him as that extra. But for me, I do think that the Canadian forward core is better. And the reason that I think that is the most important position in forward, everyone knows it, is center. McDavid, McKinnon, and Crosby. Those are your 1, 2, 3 punch. And I'm not crapping on Barzal either, but McDavid, McKinnon, Crosby, or you can make an argument for them being the 3 best centers in the game. I mean, obviously Crosby probably not anymore, but even then, he's still Sidney Crosby. He still can, he can still do Sid the Kid things. And I just think that top unit is incredible. And also, when I think if you look at special teams as well, I've got to give the power play 1 advantage to Canada. That power play 1, which will likely consist of quarterbacking it, will be Cale Makar at the blue line. And then you could have the likes of Crosby, McKinnon, McDavid, and literally anyone else, probably Reinhart, as the finisher on that power play. Although, again, you could go with anyone. And I just think that's a unit that will raise opponents' villages to the ground.
Yeah, totally. And to your point with Doughty, what I said when I did this thing, he needs to play 10 games if he's going to be on the team. That's his benchmark. He has to play. He can't be airdropped right into the lineup coming off injury. He has to play 10 games. You look at this roster, one thing I thought was really interesting. Look at all the cup winners on this team. Braden Point, Sam Reinhart, Nathan McKinnon, Mark Stone, Brad Marchand, Sidney Crosby, Steven Stamkos, Devon Taves, Cale Makar, Shea Theodore, Alex Pietrangelo, Drew Doughty if he plays, Jordan Binnington, Aiden Hill, and Logan Thompson was the backup. I'm 98% sure on that.
Yep, he started the
Vegas
run.
team.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
He started the run.
There's a lot of experience on that team. You still have Crosby and Doughty and Pietrangelo for holdovers from Sochi. There's a lot of winning experience on this team. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how Canada does in a proper best on best. I want to see how McDavid does in his first ever best on best, because remember, he was on Team North America in the World Cup of Hockey. I want to see how Marner responds to big games. I can't wait to see Scheifele play with Crosby because we know Scheifele's awful defensively, and Crosby's going to have to clean up all of his messes. Looking forward to see Marchand play with Crosby again for the first time since the World Cup. I want to see Cale Makar swashbuckle. I want to see Evan Bouchard be awesome defensively and then make boneheaded plays on defense. I just can't wait. I really can't wait.
It's going to be a really, really fun tournament for sure. I think the one note that I'll say is I'm not sure Stamkos has a place on this team, because if Stamkos is on this team, what does he bring? He brings a one-timer to the power play, but he's unlikely to crack power play one. So he just doesn't strike me as a fourth-line guy. I feel like you've either got to have him further up in the lineup to take advantage of... He's just a slow offensive guy at this point. I mean, he's just a little bit worse Ovechkin. And I just don't think if you're not giving him that spot on the power play, don't give him the spot on the team. Honestly, this is going to sound crazy. I wouldn't even put Bedard in that spot. I'd go even younger. Give me Celebrini. Celebrini's been incredible. And on top of that, he's fast, and he's got a little bit more of a playmaking touch than I feel like Bedard does. Now, I'll say I prefer Bedard's shot. I think his release is better, and I think he'll be the better goal scorer. But, I mean, Celebrini's just had an incredible season, and he's really elevating that San Jose team to the point where they might not get a bottom 5 pick this year, because they are at least coming away with some victories. And they actually look like a hockey team this year. They're definitely not going to suffer back-to-back 10-goal losses like they did last year. And I think that you talk about this team being old, perhaps an infusion of youth, Celebrini on that fourth line. I'm just saying, with the way he's playing, if he can keep up that hot streak, I don't think he will make the team. I'm just being pedantic. In my mind, I think he could be the right choice, but I'd be shocked to see him actually make the team. Sammy Bain's throwing a good name in, and I'll throw this one up to you. Hasn't been great this year, but overall a very talented defenseman. Does Noah Dobson potentially crack that defensive core?
Well, he's a left shot, if I'm not mistaken. And in this team, I don't see a place for him because Josh Morrissey's been excellent. He can run a second power play unit if you're too scared of playing Bouchard too much. I really like Noah Dobson, but in this occasion, I just don't think he would make this Team Canada team. But an interesting suggestion because I think Lou Lamoriello is a senior advisor on Canada. I don't think he's like an assistant GM, but I think he's advising the team. So that would be rather interesting. I don't know if Noah Dobson makes my team. But just back on Stamkos, the only reason I have him on this team is for the second power play unit, because special teams in a short tournament could make or break the team here. And notice who I have with him on playing center and on the wing. Probably the two fastest players outside of McDavid, because Barzal's one of, if not the fastest skaters in the league, and Lafreniere can skate too. So that kind of offsets Stamkos' lack of foot speed at this point in his career. And for the Bedard question, I think they possibly just take him just for the experience of it, kind of the future of Canadian hockey. Get him in a room with all the best Canadian players they have. I just really could see that happening.
No, that's fair enough. I just think if you're going to do that with Bedard, honestly, find a way to do the same for Celebrini would be nice. One thing I'll say to your Dobson point, he is actually a right shot defenseman. So for me, it's whether you take him out of the Bouchard spot or not. It's basically how much do you actually like Bouchard and how much do you think he's buoyed by McDavid? I mean, some of the stats I've seen surrounding Bouchard, I mean, I like him, but I saw a stat that Erik Karlsson has 51 3-point games as a defenseman. And then there was a bunch of Oilers fans in the response saying, oh, Bouchard's already got 29 and he's played way less games. I don't think he would have that on any other team. I'm not trying to take away from Bouchard too much, but I will say I think a huge part of his offensive gift is the fact that he plays with two of, if not the two best forwards in hockey. And so I don't know. I'm not super swayed by Bouchard. I've seen his lapses defensively, and for me, I might be biased because I don't love the Oilers. But I think a lot of what he brings offensively is due to his line mates. So I could see Dobson. If it was Dobson of last year, I'd be putting Dobson over Bouchard. But Noah Dobson struggled this year, so I just can't quite justify taking out Bouchard, but it's close. It's close for me.
Yeah, so the thing is with Bouchard, I'm a Bouchard defender. I really like him. I can't speak to last year, but this season, the play of Stuart Skinner has just sunk him. Because, yes, he makes a lot of defensive gaffes, but Skinner's made him look way, way worse than he is typically. So I do have him on the team, run the second power play unit. I saw a really interesting comparison today on Twitter. I can't remember quite who said it, but they should play him like Canada played PK Subban in the 2014 Olympics, where he only played, he didn't play every game. He played somewhat sheltered minutes in an offensive role. That's how I'd like to see Bouchard, because if you're relying on him for defense, you're in big trouble. He's a pure offensive defenseman, and I think they need his dynamic play on the back end, because you never know, right? You could you might It's going to take time to form chemistry. Because going back to that Sochi Olympics, remember Chris Kunitz was on that team solely to play with Crosby, and they didn't do well until the very last game against Sweden. So we'll see. I would like to see him on the roster. I think they need his offense.
No, that's fair enough. So with that, let's get to the final team in this tournament, Finland. Now, for me, on paper, this is easily the weakest team. I think the top end talent is there, but it falls off really quickly. They just don't have the depth. They just don't quite have enough team depth. Outside of their first line and their first defensive pairing, I think that's the only lines that can keep up with any other line in this league. I mean, Teravainen, Barkov, and Rantanen, that's a very good line. Even then, Teravainen's probably not up to the caliber of the left wings on any of the other teams. And then it just falls off so quickly. I didn't realize how weak Finland was down the left side. I mean, Tervo Teravainen as your first line left winger. Then you've got Arturi Lehkonen, Eric Haula, and Matthias Maccelli. And I mean, I like Maccelli, but wow, I mean that falls off really, really quickly. I mean, even the wingers outside of Rantanen and Laine down that right side, you have Joel Armia on this roster. And I just think that if you've got, Joel Armia, Anton Lundell, and Matthias Maccelli out against any of the lines of the States and Team Canada, they could make them pay. So, I mean, some interesting players on Finland, but you can tell this is meant to be Team Russia because they just aren't there.
Nope, this is by far the weakest team. I love Barkov. I love Aho. Antonen's been great, but we haven't seen Laine. Roope Hintz isn't having the year he usually has. Their winger depth is very mediocre. Like Eli Tolvanen hasn't done a ton in Seattle. Rasmus Ristolainen, what is this, 2016 Buffalo? Like it's a problem. And yes, Saros is really good, but he's been on a poor team in Nashville this year. Notice I have Kevin Lankinen as the third goaltender. I think in the couple of weeks since I did this roster, he's probably surpassed Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen as a primary backup. But yeah, this is clearly the weakest team. But who knows? Maybe we'll have a Team Europe situation where the team everyone expects to be bad finds some chemistry and makes it all the way. It's a short tournament. You never really know what's going to happen. But the bottom line is I'm just so excited for this tournament because the kids don't know what they've been missing in pure best on best hockey. And because it's been 10 years. I just can't wait.
No, I could not agree more. I mean, I think that if you are watching this stream and you haven't gotten to see best on best international hockey before, it is not like anything you can see in the NHL because you just can never have rosters that are that skilled. And I mean, I don't know, Finland. I mean, again, in a tournament that's this short, anything can happen. But looking at that team, I just don't think they've got the firepower to get it done. I think the only area where they're not severely outclassed is down the middle. I mean, Barkov, Aho, and Hintz is a pretty good 1-2-3 punch. You're right, Hintz hasn't been great, but overall as a player, he's a pretty good player. So I would say down the center, that's the one area they're not severely outclassed. And maybe goaltending too. If you have Saros playing at his best, he's one of the best goaltenders in the league. But outside of center depth and goaltending, I think that their defense and their wingers just don't even remotely compare. I mean, that defense is just... that defense is an actual NHL defense. I mean, I think that is a first pairing, a second pairing, and a third pairing. I don't think, as opposed to all the other teams have 3 first pairings kind of thing. But yeah, it really makes me sad that Russia's not in this because I think that if you replace Finland with Russia, it's just so much more interesting of a tournament because Russia really would have just an awesome lineup. And I mean, I don't know how much time we want to spend on this. Could draft a Team Russia, but that might take a decent bit of time. And we should probably move back on to the Canucks, considering this is a Canucks show. So why don't we move on to the third period here on Game Over Vancouver and talk a little bit more about the Canucks. We'll talk about the future and we'll touch again on some of the players. So, of course, third period sponsored by Game Over Merch. You got the Game Over Merch up on the screen now. You can see anything and everything for a hockey fan. And, of course, holiday season coming up. You want to give a gift of some good merch. Super comfortable. I can now confirm having seen it in person. Got t-shirts, got sweaters, great sweater weather. Whether you're always got a cup of tea on the go like me, you can get a Game Over mug. anything and everything that you could want. And it's just another great way to support us and the work that we do here on Game Over. And you know what? While I am doing my ad reads, let's get to the one that I didn't do right off the start. We'll take away the merch, bring Joseph back, and tell you about the other way that you can support us financially is crowdfunding. Of course, this is a completely independent production. It is all just done by us here at Game Over. There's no big company behind us. We are an independent production focused on community, inclusion, and quality people. If you're interested in supporting us more than you already do by liking and subscribing, we've got crowdfunding options available. In the description of this episode, you'll find a link to our Patreon page. We're also working on a page through LaRouche, a crowdfunding platform for companies originating in Quebec, which is very similar to Kickstarter. For LaRouche, we're aiming to raise $15,000, and if we hit that goal, we'll gain access to government grants that will allow us to employ more people and create more content. If you have any ideas for what you'd like to see for giveaways from crowdfunding efforts, let us know in the comments or in our Discord server, which you should join as we're always active in our Discord talking about the games. Getting back to the game, thriller in overtime, and a name that we actually haven't touched on too much this show is Kevin Lankinen. Now, I'm going to throw up a really, really hot take that I said while this game was happening, and that is, it seems unthinkable right now, but Thatcher Demko is coming off of a major injury, which has never before happened in the NHL, and has already been confirmed that this is a lifelong injury he is going to have to deal with for the rest of not just his career, but his life. If he comes back and he is subpar, do you consider making Kevin Lankinen the starting netminder, not just for this season, but for the future as well? I mean, remember that, yes, he's getting on in age a little bit, Kevin Lankinen, but he's not that far removed from being a pretty good quality prospect. He's been an unreal backup in Nashville. He's been even better here in Vancouver, and he will need a contract coming up this season. Do you try and bank on Thatcher Demko making a recovery if he's bad this season for next year? Or do you just play it safe with Kevin Lankinen, considering that he has been undoubtedly a starting quality netminder in this league for Vancouver this season?
Personally, I'm now at the point with Thatcher Demko where I've resigned to the fact that he's never going to be 100% healthy in his NHL career again. Because like you mentioned, this is an injury in his knee that just hasn't happened in the NHL. That reminds me a little bit of Jack Eichel's neck injury. There's no real precedent here for what's happened and the rehab and the recovery. It's even before that, Thatcher Demko was kind of chronically injured. He had his hip issues, I remember, a few years ago. So I'm just wondering if this might just be a late career Carey Price kind of thing where he's constantly battling injuries. And when he's on his game, he's great. But you just can't rely on him to be a full-time starter. So with that in mind, I think, yeah, if Demko comes back and he's not great, you really seriously got to think about the future in that. And is that Lankinen? I don't know. Because at the end of the day, it's November 29th. It's still really early in this season. He could go on a tailspin from here. Because remember, I caution Canuck fans about getting too attached to backup goalies. Remember Spencer Martin? How good he was for like a 10-game stretch a few years ago? Signed him to a 3-year contract? Never found that form again. Eddie Lack. We all loved Eddie Lack. The second they asked him to be a starter, didn't work. So I do wonder how Vancouver moves on from here, because can you rely on Thatcher Demko to be, let's say, 50 games a season? I say no. I think they're going to have to find some kind of workable tandem to work around Thatcher Demko's injury history, because I just can't expect him to be fully healthy ever again in his career. There's just too much history here against Demko. And I mean, I hope he finds a way to manage his knee issue, but I'm just not counting on it. I'm not holding my breath.
No, and that's totally fair enough. I think you make a really great point about the fact that Demko could potentially still be the starter, but with a starter that's had this much injury history, you'd have to really manage his load. When you're managing his load to the point where he's only playing 40 or 45 games, you don't really have a true starter at that point. You've kind of got your 1A and your 1B, and your 1A will play in the playoffs, but you need your 1B to not just be a backup goaltender. You need them to be a very high-quality goaltender, and I think Kevin Lankinen fits the bill, but then it depends kind of how much you're willing to pay him, because for Lankinen, this next offseason is his payday. He was a great backup to UC Saros last year in Nashville. What he's doing this year in Vancouver, unprecedented, and will undoubtedly earn him some serious dollars in the offseason. And I think it's serious dollars that he will earn. But It's just whether or not it's here or whether or not it's in somewhere else. So I think Kevin Lankinen would kind of be the perfect goaltender for Vancouver. I think the difference with Lankinen, you make a good point about Martin, and it's not just the one case of Martin, Lack, Delia. There's a ton of backup goaltenders that look good at flashes in the pants. Is I do think that Lankinen has now shown a little bit more consistency than any of them ever did. Lankinen was a great backup last year in Nashville. That alone is what those goaltenders did that you pointed out, Joseph. What he's now doing here in Vancouver, none of those goaltenders were able to do. He has stepped up in a starting role for Vancouver. Now, yes, it's only been a starting role for 2 months, but that's already 2 months more than those goaltenders were able to achieve as starting goaltenders for Vancouver. So I do think that Lankinen's a better option than any of those ever were, but whether he can be a true starter does raise some questions. But I also think it's a huge risk for the Canucks, because if you let him go and Demko doesn't provide the high quality starting goaltending you need him to, where do you turn? I mean, there's no names that come to my mind right away for the replacement of Kevin Lankinen. And you'd need someone to be really good. If you're expecting 40, even 35 to 40 games a year, you can't have substandard goaltending for 35 to 40 games a year and make the playoffs comfortably. And so that's my counterpoint to that. And Volbil, I'm going to let Joseph respond to what I just said, and then we'll get to your question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just can't rely on Demko, I don't think, anymore. And you make a good point about Lack and Martin. They didn't have the track record that Lankinen had or the future success. But Lankinen, he started in Chicago and he did well there. He did well in Nashville. He's done well here. So I agree. It is a perfect made tandem role for Demko if you need him. Just the question is, can he sustain it throughout this season? Will Demko come back? Will Demko come back at any level? Because in my opinion, Artur Shilovs has completely played himself out of any kind of scenario where you can rely on him for big minutes at the NHL level. I'm not saying it's his fault. He's probably rushed a little bit into the league this year. Probably should have spent one more year in Abbotsford. You can't rely on him to give you quality minutes at the NHL anymore. Nikita Tolopolo, I don't think he's ever really been hyped up as a potential starter of the future. So really, it's just these two guys, Demko and Lankinen. You've got to rely on one of them to be healthy. And Demko, I just don't think you can do that anymore.
No, 100%. So it is a big quandary as to what the Canucks are going to do with their goaltending of the future. But I do think ultimately it's just a little too early to talk about it, because it does depend what version of Thatcher Demko we see when he's back. But that being said, with the amount of injuries he has had in his career, to date, one more could be the end of it for him. He has had so many major injuries, and, he's only halfway through his career. Yeah, one more injury could sideline him for the rest of it. So I do think it's a big risk, keeping Demko as the starter of the future, even though when he is on his game, he can be a top 3 goalie in this league. I'm going to get to the question asked by Volbill99 now. This isn't a relevant question to the Canucks, but should the Nashville Predators blow it up? What the hell happened in Nashville? I mean, last year, a first-round team that gave up a pretty decent fight to the Vancouver Canucks went and picked up 3 huge acquisitions, all of whom on paper make the team significantly better, in Brady Shea, an amazing top 4 defender in Carolina who played big minutes and was reliable, Jonathan Marchessault won a cup with Vegas while being a significant piece of that, and Steven Stamkos, who needs no introduction. And the team got worse, not by a little, by a lot. They're one of the worst teams. I don't know what's happening to them. And I think that if you can't turn it around quickly, you have no choice but to blow it up. I mean, they built this team for this year. So if you're not good this year, I mean, they're not going to be better next year. They're locked into a lot of these contracts, and I just don't know what you can do outside of blowing it up.
Well, I think the biggest key of what you just said there is they're locked into these contracts, and therefore they can't blow it up. Stamkos, 3 more years after this one. Shea, 6 more years after this one. Marchessault, long-term. Saros, long-term. Yossi, long-term. I don't think you can blow it up with how much term invested into your core. Everything that could go wrong for Nashville has gone wrong. Stamkos has regressed. Marchessault has regressed. Forsberg hasn't been quite as good as he's been last year. Nyquist has been nowhere near as good as he was last year. Ryan O'Reilly's getting really old. Andrew Brunette hasn't been able to push all the buttons like he did last year. It's just extremely surprising to see, because I had them making the playoffs really with ease in the Central Division, which I don't think is a particularly strong division in this league. I mean, I'm stunned at how bad they've been, because they can't get it on track. I wonder, Does Barry Trotz use the fire the coach option? Burnett was really good last year. He kind of just got there. Can you use that one? I just don't really know. I mean, it's been a real shock how poor they've been. But just to the question asked, I don't think they can blow it up. There's too much term locked in. I think you owe it to the current core to give it at least one more go after this year because, it's really hard to rebuild when you're locked into so many contracts. Like you just look at like use Canucks for example. Remember they were trying to trade JT Miller the second they signed him to that long-term deal. They couldn't get it done because all the money was owed to him. Uh, it's just and Nashville. Remember, it's a no-income tax state. It's an attractive destination. Maybe you just go into free agency next year and you try and bring in some more core pieces to help them out. Because really, there's no reason they should be this bad. They have depth on up front. They have a good defense core, even though they got rid of Fabro for nothing. It's rather surprising how bad they've been. Maybe it's a bit of inexperience by Barry Trotz, a bit of naivete. First time as a general manager, bringing that many old players in one offseason. Maybe it was just too much change. Sometimes that happens. Too much change in a locker room, too much change on the ice. Because remember, like we said earlier in the show, it takes time to adjust to your new surroundings. And maybe that's just been the problem. There has been enough time to adjust, and they just haven't been able to figure out. And I think it's almost too late at this point for this season.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, if you have a look at the standings, I won't go so far to say it's too late at this point for the season for them. They're 7 points back of a playoff spot right now, which is already a pretty big margin. They would have to go on a huge, huge run, which they were able to do last year, but last year they weren't in as bad a spot as they are right now. This run, the run that they went on late last year has to come now. It can't wait much longer for them. And yeah, when you're moving, I mean, I don't think it's impossible for them to blow it up. I think there is teams that would trade for guys with term. But I do think it's gonna be a lot harder, and I do think you're gonna get less for them, as opposed to if they were RFAs or UFAs. So it's tough for Nashville. I mean, they made a big gamble over the offseason, and it just didn't pay off at all. And I mean, yeah, as you said, just what do you even do? There's so few pieces on paper that you can move for that team. And they're just not even close. I mean, they're one singular point ahead of the Blackhawks. And they've got a game played more than Chicago, too. There's a chance if Chicago win their next game, they'll be dead last in the Central. And I mean, that's just not good enough. And they've played the most games in the Central, too, out of everyone. So I don't really know what to do for them. I mean, yeah, it's really tough for Nashville. Bunch of big gambles didn't work out. I mean, if you look at every other team in both conferences that are in those 7th and 8th positions, there's very few teams that are in comparable positions. Pittsburgh is the one that comes to mind, where you've got a bunch of guys on term, locked up, and you're still trying to be competitive like Nashville is. And I mean, Pittsburgh, that's not an enviable situation that you want to be in whatsoever. And you know what's crazy? Pittsburgh's still ahead of Nashville. They have one more point than them. Think about how much hate Pittsburgh has gotten over the year and like how hopeless that team seems. They're still better off than Nashville. So, I mean, I don't even know what you do if you're the Predators. It's been a brutal year. It's been nothing like they've wanted it to. At this point, you're just relying on that team figuring it out, because really that's the option. They have to figure it out. There's no other option.
Nope, no other option. There's too much money in term locked up. I don't think they can rebuild. You look at Pittsburgh, everyone knew this was a possibility with Pittsburgh. They've missed the playoffs each of the past 2 years. All their best players are old. They don't have reliable goaltending. At the very core of the issue in Nashville, you thought they'd get reliable goaltending. They haven't. Saros hasn't been at the level he usually is. Pittsburgh, I knew Tristan Jarry, frankly, wasn't going to do well this year. He hasn't been very good in a while. But it's just an end of an era in Pittsburgh, and new era Nashville wanted hasn't gone its way at all.
No, it hasn't. So, all right, we have been on air for quite a while now. So why don't we take one final recap of the Canucks game and anything that we want to see for the Canucks, moving forward, briefly outline the schedule as well. And then we'll get to the end. If anyone is watching in chat and you guys have any questions for Joseph or I, it doesn't have to be about the Canucks, any hockey-related topic in general, we'll get to in the fourth. But now, taking a look at the schedule for Vancouver and the future for this team. Super early game for the Canucks against the Red Wings. 9:30 a.m. PST start for that one. So that's the first time this year where I'm going to have to actually set an alarm for a Canucks game. But that will be an interesting one. Red Wings, I mean, I am kind of fine with seeing the Red Wings not being a great team, but they much like my Ottawa Senators, have been a team in the Atlantic Division which has been trying to take a step forward for a really long time, and they just have not. 10-11-2 for 22 points on the year. Just frankly, another year of them not being good enough, and the Yzer plan really looking like it's not working out. But it's a home game for Detroit. Could be a bit of a trap game for Vancouver. They do have a couple days off now to rest Kevin Lankinen, who's likely to start that one. But I mean, going up against the Red Wings, another game that, quite frankly, the Canucks should be coming away with. I mean, they struggled against Buffalo, but at the very least, they did get the win. I'm expecting a similar story here against Detroit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Detroit's a weird team because they're supposed to be coming out to the end stage of the rebuild by now, but they just can't get any traction. The Yzer plan is very near the point where it's a failure. Derek Lalonde, the head coach, I believe, is on thin ice. I'm kind of surprised he hasn't been let go just yet because they lost again to New Jersey today. They have not been able to gain really any traction. Patrick Kane is still a decent offensive player, but he's old. The DeBrincat acquisition didn't quite work out the way they wanted to. Larkin's great, but is he a number one center on a championship team? Probably not. Mort Sider's taken a step back the past few years. Partially, I think that's because they play him a lot with Ben Sherratt. They don't have a proper partner for him. This is a winnable game for Vancouver. Yes, it's a back-to-back with travel, and yes, it's a very weird start time. But it's something that I want to see Vancouver do better with. Is just get rid of the excuses. It's an early game for everybody. I expect Vancouver here to come out on top because Detroit, frankly, isn't a great team.
No, they're not. But I mean, we've seen the Canucks struggle against worse teams. I mean, the Pittsburgh Penguins decimated Vancouver, and I mean, yeah. So I don't really know what to expect from this Vancouver team at this point. They've just been so inconsistent, and I mean, I haven't liked what I've seen from Vancouver in a lot of the last few games. I mean, Buffalo. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean to Buffalo, but this shouldn't have been as hard of a game as it was. I mean, I guess Buffalo only just behind Vancouver in the standings, but I mean, the Canucks beating themselves on a lot of these, and again, only 20 shots registered in regulation for the Canucks. I mean, that's just not a whole lot. And I mean, if you're shooting at a ridiculously high percentage, which they were last year, that's all right. If you're scoring on 5 times on 20 shots, that's okay. But I mean, the average, you're realistically getting 1 or 2 goals on 20 shots. So, I mean, Kevin Lankinen's been a huge reason for this team's success. And you said it off air, so I'm going to repeat it on air. It's not unfair to say that Kevin Lankinen has saved the Canucks season. I mean, they have been so dead in the water, and the amount of games where Kevin Lankinen has basically single-handedly won the game for Vancouver, I'll say it. He's the only reason the Canucks came away with the win tonight, or this morning, whatever you want to call it. Kevin Lankinen is the only reason. I mean, he had some spectacular saves in the third, and I mean, a lights-out game saver in overtime, too. So, I mean, yeah, Kevin Lankinen has just been lights out for this team, and a big reason why the Canucks season isn't already a lot worse than it is.
Yeah, because if you think about it, like they almost didn't sign Lankinen because it was late in August when he was signed.
It was training
Very
camp, yeah.
rare you see. Yeah, it was very rare that you see anyone, let alone a goalie, sign that late. I know Peter Suter was a late signing 2 off seasons ago now. You just don't see this very often. If Artur Shilovs is forced into Kevin Lankinen's minutes that he's had this year, let's say he plays all the same games, and Nikita Tolipolo is a backup, there's a non-zero chance that Vancouver is a bottom 5 team in the league. Because Shilovs has been awful. They haven't been scoring it the way they wanted to. Lankinen saved the game today in overtime. That's a loss with Shilovs in that probably. I don't think he makes that save. So yeah, Lankinen, he saved the season. They are not a playoff team or even close to a playoff team if they don't sign him. Because this Demko injury has lingered longer than I think a lot of us were expecting, right? It's been almost 2 months of the season he's not there. So facts of the matter is Kevin Lankinen deserves a lot of props for helping the Canucks hover around 500 to be a bit above 500 until Demko gets back. So props to him. Huge, huge signing by the Alvin Rutherford regime, and one they should get a lot of kudos for.
No, absolutely. I mean, both of the guys they poached from the Nashville Predators have been incredible. As of course, Kiefer Sherwood, also an unreal addition for Vancouver. But yeah, a lot of question marks for the Canucks looking forward this season. It's weird because it has felt so negative surrounding Vancouver. Yet, if you actually look at the standings and the points percentage and stuff like that, Canucks are 5-5 in their last 10, 12-7-3 for 27 points, and they're in a wild card spot. Things aren't looking too bad for this team. Overall, it's not been too bad of a season, despite the fact it has kind of felt like a pretty bad season, just because our expectations were so raised from last year. But goaltending is going to be under the microscope all year for Vancouver, especially with how bad the defense has been. You need your goaltending to be saving you games. And that's why I'm concerned about Vancouver, is not just Thatcher Demko, but it's the fact that Thatcher Demko, he can't just come back and be average. He has to be able to steal you games like Lankinen's been doing, because this Canucks defense has just not been good enough. And I mean, looking at the defense tonight, I mean, like, I don't know what you thought of those pairings, but none of them looked like they were good to me. But the issue is that I look at those pairings, and on paper, they're probably the best pairings that you can muster with Hronek out and with no other real options for this team. I mean, I think maybe you try riding 7D for some of these games coming up, bring up Mark Friedman, just to take the load off of some of these defensemen that shouldn't be playing 20 minutes a night. But I mean, it's not a good-looking defensive unit for Vancouver.
No, and I personally am not a fan of the 11-7 configuration. It messes with the ice time of the forwards. The bottom six guys are running a man down, so that's a little screwed up. So personally, I wouldn't do 11-7 because it's not like Mark Friedman's going to come in here and save the world. He's an all right seventh defenseman, but nothing more than that. But yeah, like you were saying, Hughes and Myers, Susie playing with a mishmash of players, including Noah Juleson. Noah Juleson's a nice story. He came in here on the Oli Levy trade of all people, and he's managed to stick around. That was him in Lamico, but he's done well for himself. He can't be on the second pair if you want to win games. Just can't do it because you can't play Desharnais above him. It's been abundantly clear that he can't play above the third pair. It's a problem. They need Hronek back as soon as possible, and if he's going to be out long term, as it looks like he is, they need some reinforcements quickly.
No, absolutely. Yeah, Desharnais, just a gamble gone wrong. And I do understand where the Desharnais kind of gambit came from, in some of the best defensive coaching that turned around, Myers' career. They made the Susie Myers pairing unbelievable in the playoffs last year. So I think they were hoping that, like, okay, the one thing we can't teach is size. Let's just get a big guy and make him into a good defenseman. That hasn't happened yet. Now, still lots of runway left in the season for Sergei Gonchar and Adam Foote to work their magic with the defensive core. But, oh man, Desharnais, I mean, he just hasn't looked like an NHL defenseman in any of these games. I mean, he gets beaten consistently. I want him to be good. He seems like such an awesome character in the locker room. He seems like a great guy. And of course, he has the size to be a seriously great NHL defenseman. If Foote and Gonchar can even just turn him into a legitimate third pairing defenseman, I'd be over the moon. But right now, I mean, it's tough watching him play. It's most shifts he looks out of whack with the rest of his defensive core. And especially when you've got some other guys, it's the bottom four that's just so worrying. I mean, I like Erik Brannstrom, but I mean, tonight was a game where the Brannstrom haters really got a lot to work with. He's a really offensive first defenseman. And I think that's all right to have a guy like that in your bottom pairing. He's great at moving the puck out of his own end. But I think where you do see him get beat is just on the defensive coverage. He's not that big. It's not that hard if you're a power forward to get around him. And on top of that, his defensive IQ isn't necessarily all there either. So while I don't hate having him down there, you've got to be playing him along a really defensively responsible defenseman. The Canucks just don't have that in their bottom pairing right now. I mean, seriously, who do you play him alongside? Forbort when he comes back, probably not that guy. Desharnais, we definitely know is not that guy. Brannstrom, at least we know he can flip-flop both sides. We saw that in Ottawa. But they don't have anyone on the other side either. It's just that you don't have the guy that you need to be playing with Sever Brannstrom. And I almost wonder if the Canucks defensive trade, a lot of people are saying that it should be a superstar or a really high-quality defenseman. I don't think you necessarily need to do that. I think you just need to get a really solid, defensively responsible third pairing guy that can play along Brannstrom. And I mean, if you have a solid third pairing, you know what your first pairing is. Susie Myers, they'll figure it out maybe. So I don't know. I don't necessarily think the Canucks need to swing for a home run on the defense market, but I think they need to get someone.
Yeah, it's just who has the cap space, who wants to make a trade. It's just so hard at this point in the season to make a deal because no one wants to help you, like we said early in the show. It just goes to show that size isn't everything, because that's Darnay's third best qualities is that he's big and that he's mean. I mean, you can't teach size, but you certainly can teach. I mean, big. I'd much rather have small and good than big and bad. And Brannstrom is small and good, but how good? never going to be an elite defenseman. The third pairing guy is useful, but they need to aim a little if they want a Stanley Cup, because right now the defense isn't even close to Stanley Cup worthy.
No, it's just not. So we'll see what they do with that. But honestly, with that, I think I'm about ready to wrap this up. This has actually been the second longest Game Over Vancouver show this season. So thanks, Joseph, for joining me for all this time. Honestly, I didn't realize we'd gone as long as we had. This has been a great talk with you. So thanks again for joining me. If you guys have enjoyed Joseph, you can find him at at Augusti_Joseph19 on Twitter. I can read, don't worry. Thank you so much for joining me, Joseph. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Zach.
No, absolutely. So thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We'll get to the fourth. I don't have any questions in chat, so I think we are just ready to wrap it up. If you guys are still watching, if you've got any last minute questions, we'll get into it. Once again, the fourth, of course, is brought to you by our Hyperdrive Hockey. Once again, just uploaded a bunch of really great episodes about the PWHL, so I highly recommend you check those out. PWHL, just great hockey. I'm very interested to see what they do with their broadcast. We've seen a lot of information being leaked over the year that it sounds like they're going to Prime, but then we also hear that it sounds like there's a chance they might still be brought up for on YouTube. So we'll see what it gets done with that. But we'll call it here. Thank you so much once again to Joseph Augusti for joining me for the show. Thank you to you, the viewer, for joining in. As always, I've been your host, Zach Clarke, and stick around for the game on Sunday against the Detroit Red Wings. We'll have all the coverage on the post-game for you after that with our good friend and host of the show, Kaja May. We'll have that one. So thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great rest of your night.